Next story of the day is about
To
Iran.
ISIS.
So yesterday I covered the explosion in Iran at the Qassem Soleimani Memorial at a cemetery in Iran, and there was speculation as to who was responsible for it. There were plenty of diaspora Iranians that live outside of Iran, that rushed to claim that it was Iran doing it to itself, a false flag, if you will. It's not really that weird if you are familiar with the politics of Iranians and diaspora and how reactionary they can get, okay? Especially ones that don't have any more remaining family members in Iran. Oh my God, the less family members they have in Iran, the more reactionary they are. Iran blamed Israel and the US as well. So that part is not entirely true. Iran did say, I think something along the lines of potentially it could be the United States of America or Israel, but they said that they were investigating it. At least as far as I understand, it was that their first priority was looking into figuring out who it was. Leftists were quick to blame Israel. Some did. An understandable assumption to make. Israel has, executions and whatnot on Iranian soil, but the major reason as to why, perhaps not likely to be Israel or the United States of America, especially, unless it was like a group that they had funded and facilitated like MEK, because ultimately the United States of America and Israel indiscriminately and regularly kill civilians on foreign soil. But usually they do it while they're simultaneously trying to kill a high priority target. It is still an act of terror, and it's not because of some moral reason, considering that there weren't any high priority targets at this explosion as far as we know of, overwhelmingly simply civilians. This doesn't have the signature of a Israeli attack. I thought ISIS was done though. ISIS is not done. ISIS-K, Khorasan, as we talked about in Afghanistan, is still in operation. They're very marginal, and of course they're another group that still exists that is very limited in nature. I thought ISIS was done because ISIS-K in and of itself is pretty done. Let's continue.
This is claiming responsibility for those twin blasts in southern Iran yesterday that claimed dozens of lives. Word of that comes as the UN Security Council issued a statement condemning the attack. Let's bring in journalist Iris Mackler. She is tracking this unfolding story for us from Jerusalem. Iris, what more can you tell us?
ISIS attacking a pretty politically strong Islamic State is weird. This is not an attack against Occident. Seems that they're only seeking for blood without political motivation. You're also wrong. ISIS almost exclusively attacks Islamic states. What do you mean? Also, they attacked a Shia state, their favorite type of people to kill if they can ever get away with it. You're wrong about that as well. Pound for pound, ISIS has attacked less non-Muslim states than they have attacked predominantly Muslim populations. It is ridiculous to claim that ISIS is first and foremost preoccupied with killing non-Muslim actors in the region. They do kill non-Muslims, or what they consider to be non-Muslims, which happen to usually be Arabs, individuals in the territories that they take over. Kurds, they fight Kurds a lot. They fight Turkish forces. They fight a lot of Shia forces, but that's the largest battles for them. This was a Newsweek article that is a good article. I've brought this up before. Israeli Defense Minister Moshe Yaalon attends a conference in Tel Aviv where he said the words, "I prefer ISIS to Iran on our borders." What did he mean by this? He was talking about a time when al-Nusra had taken over territory in Syria and had actual border control between the Israeli occupied territories in Syria, the Golan Heights, and Syria proper. Israel has also given medical aid to ISIS-style militant groups. Israeli think tank, "Don't destroy ISIS" is a useful tool against Iran, Hezbollah, Syria. I think this was a Salon article from Ben. UN report Israel in regular contact with Syrian rebels, including ISIS. Members of ISIS and Nusra Front also have been treated in Israeli hospitals. A report submitted to the United Nations Security Council by UN observers in the Golan Heights over the past 18 months, here, this is what I was talking about, where they had a field hospital that they operated for, specifically for ISIS militants. Citing the UN report, Haaretz noted that there have been several instances detailed in the report that shows close ties between Syrian armed rebels and the Israeli army. According to the UN report, a person wounded on the 15th of September was taken by armed members of the opposition across the ceasefire line, where he was transferred to a civilian ambulance escorted by an IDF vehicle. The Yarmouk Valley is run by ISIS and left alone by Israel. This is a testament to the complex, cynical, and calculated machinations of actors in this conflict. They have a enemy of my enemy is my friend type attitude towards ISIS. This is what I was talking about when I said Israel is closer to ISIS. Destroying cultural and religious monuments, specifically because, you consider them to be barbaric or outside of your interests, is what Israel does. Israel also claims to be doing this at the behest of religious conquest. If you listen to their military leadership or even their elected members in the Knesset, they regularly invoke Judaism. It's not correct. ISIS does the same. They claim to be the real representatives of Islam. They regularly kill non-believers and commit acts of terrorism upon civilian populations which they dominate and occupy areas. ISIS's behavior is closest to imperialism by a non-state actor as you can get. Israel does the same thing. I think you're taking this comparison a bit far. Absolutely not. I've made this comparison before. If we are to look at Hamas and Israel as separate entities and compare them to ISIS, Israel's actions are infinitely closer to ISIS than Hamas's actions are. Unless you look at Hamas and say they are barbaric Arabs who are simply doing indiscriminate violence, not with a direct goal of resisting against an apartheid state. You might not agree with the methods. I certainly don't. October 7th is, in my opinion, an act of terror, as I've mentioned before, time and time again. The specific goal for Hamas is the end to the occupation. The specific goal for ISIS is to control as much territory as they physically possibly can through very violent means. Israel has a similar goal. Israel also, much like ISIS, is a false bearer of their own respective religions. Israel rides Judaism in the same way that ISIS rides Islam. Let's continue.
Its claim and its significance given the heightened tensions across the Middle East right now.
We heard within the last hour that there was a statement issued by ISIS, by the Islamic State, and it said that it had carried out this attack. It spoke in disparaging terms about the Shia. Just a reminder, Iran is ruled by the Shia Ayatollahs. ISIS, the Islamic State, is a Sunni group. No love lost there, and that's what we have at the moment. Yesterday we were discussing who it might be when there was no claim. Was it internal enemies, Kurds, other groups, Arab groups in the south of the country who are opposed to the Iranian rule? Was it the Islamic State? Was it Israel?
Ultimately, I think it's likely that this is correct, that this is a K operation, I guess. I thought that their capabilities were significantly more limited than being able to do such a thing. Certainly could be a opportunist act by ISIS-K rather than this being directly an American or even an Israeli attack. It also is always more likely than this just being like an Iranian self-imposed false flag, which is what some people were bringing up because Qassem Soleimani's family members were not there attending the memorial, which is what they said was reason alone for this to be an Iranian explosion on its own. I don't believe Iran needs a false flag attack for a justification to attack Israel or anyone else for that matter. They recognize the popularity of their proxy groups or groups that are funded and armed by Iran. They already have a mandate if they were to go and attack Israel. This was the expectation from the population of the region. This was what they thought was going to happen already after October 7th. Ultimately, you look at who stands to gain the most, but this is pure speculation. Yes, Imaber is right. This is pure speculation. The timing of the attack and the victims of the attack are very different than Israel's signature, though. Israel has conducted operations and has conducted assassinations both on Iranian soil and of Iranian nationals in the region. They've killed nuclear scientists. They've killed top-ranking military officials. Israel, however, seemingly is trying to expand the war a little bit, basically looking at how the regional adversaries will react, them expanding on the conflict, a certainty. I've seen people say ISIS never attacks Israel, try to imply ISIS are Mossad lackeys. Are ISIS Muslim? I mean, they consider themselves to be Muslim, and they consider what they're doing to be at the behest of Islam and their understanding of Islam, but they're not. Yeah, this was the Haaretz report. Israel supported rebel groups to push Iranian-backed forces and ISIS fighters away from the Israeli border, foreign policy reports. ISIS is like the evangelicals of Islam. No Muslim will claim ISIS, for the record, just so you understand. They're not real Muslims. They just use Islam as to claim what they're doing is to represent true Islam, but it's not correct at all. That's it on the update for Iran. For the record, the ISIS responsibility for attacks on Israel or Jewish people is in dispute. But it doesn't really matter because ISIS will regularly do a call to arms to attack members in the Western world like Jews, Christians, anyone they can. ISIS's victims are predominantly Muslim. The Sunni-Shia divide is only significant in the realm of geopolitics. It's definitely an important divide, but it's not like, random Sunnis are like trying to kill random Shias or anything. I mean, I would say it's not dissimilar to like Protestant Catholic divisions in Ireland, but not necessarily, because the Protestants are supposed to be operating at the behest of a colonial power, whereas like the Sunni-Shia divide is not the same. They're just like different. I don't know. I don't know how to give you an exact comparison. Can you explain what you mean by ISIS isn't actually Muslim? I'm not calling bull. Genuinely don't know. They ride for Islam. They claim they're Muslim, but they're not actually Muslim. Like, they're not following the Islamic doctrine at all. It's like looking at one of the edge cults, like the Westboro Baptist Church, and be like, that's true Christianity, okay? Because it's not true. It's all a matter of interpretation to begin with, but it's like they are way above and beyond even the American evangelicals. That's it. If American evangelicals actually acted out on their desires, their blood and soil conquest, in an area where there is, like, the material conditions are as volatile and as awful as, like, the Middle East, instead of going to Applebee's and drowning themselves in margs and $5 margs and jalapeno poppers. Does that make sense? When you're living in the imperial core, your most extremist religious nut jobs are not going to act out on their desires because there is not enough economic instability. Does that make sense? When you say no other Muslims will support ISIS, does that include all other Shia groups? ISIS is not a Shia group. Nobody supports ISIS other than ISIS members, okay? And ISIS is not Shia. And no, it is different than Hezbollah or other Shia groups in the region who actually do govern over an area. ISIS's governance over an area is not exactly real governance. It's like having a roving gang take over your village. No Sunni Muslim will turn around and go, ISIS is good. They won't say it. Why? Because ISIS kills a ton of Muslims. Like, they do less than the Mexican cartels. No, like, at least cartels, like, sometimes, pay it forward a little bit, or they have like some level of governance duties. ISIS doesn't do that at all. There is no real governance. They're just like, they're militants. Real governance means civic duties, like responsibilities of the civilian population. Does that make sense? Like, if I were to compare it to Pablo Escobar, for example, like, he did a lot. He was very violent, certainly, but he built like a sense of community and recognized the shared interests of the people that he ruled over, or a territory that he ruled over. And I would say the same for some of the other cartels in Mexico, for example. Whereas ISIS's governance was not about like, food programs or anything. Like, there was no care or consideration for the civilian population that they dominated. You guys not remember we did the ISIS healthcare thing where they like stole the British NHS logo? The Islamic State Health Service, the ISHS. Islamic State appears to have released a promotional video for its own health service featuring NHS style branding and an Australian doctor. Romanticizing narcos? I'm not romanticizing them at all. We're making comparisons between like bad and worse, if that makes sense. Worse being worse than bad. Like, 3-minute ad break at the top of the hour is bad, is worse than the 1-minute ad break in the middle of the hour. I can't think of a group that is like as universally despised by the people. Like, even the Taliban are not as universally despised as ISIS is by the people that they rule over, and the Taliban is despised. Does that make sense? This does not mean the Taliban is good, and I'm certainly not saying that. Like, ISIS's occupation is akin to a colonial one. Like, the only historical examples I can use are basically akin to like, a French colony or a British colony or something, because they operate in a similar structure. Sure, they build like a police force, but so did the British in India. The power that ISIS holds is marginal now, like much, much, much smaller. Like, Hamas has some semblance of, support amongst the Palestinian population, albeit its inception, it was marginal support. And throughout the years, that support has increased due to Israel's actions. ISIS, on the other hand, has never had popular support or any kind of support whatsoever from a civilian population. The only people that support ISIS are motherfuckers who are in ISIS. If anything, this is going to be a controversial opinion. In the Islamic world, I don't know if I should even say this. Never mind. LARPers in the Western world, Salafist LARPers in the Western world are probably larger in size, albeit still incredibly marginal, than the Muslim world, is what I mean. If you ever see someone who acts like, I guess ISIS is doing an honest or just thing, then you're most likely encountering someone who is a LARPer in the West. That's why they unironically will recruit from the West more than they do from the areas that they're operating in. 100%. It's always the most reactionary dildos that live in the lap of luxury in comparison to their Muslim brothers and sisters living in areas that have been destroyed by Western occupation that turn around and act like they're jihadis themselves, okay? And that's part of the reason why they can get radicalized, I guess. It's the same thing between like that Lebanese video that popped off and the quote retweets on that Lebanese video about like Muslims in Lebanon being like, yeah, I love Christmas. What do you mean? And then like the quote retweets are just like people who fantasize about this, Sharia governed Islamic world, but they live in England, being like, oh man, the Muslim world has fallen. And it's like, dude, you are insane, okay? And it's very stupid. Part of the reason is no different than the way that like German Turks are oftentimes more right-wing than Turks living in Turkey. Them being Turkish, their Turkish background places them in second-class citizenship, which creates a unique environment where they become more hardened in their positions and become more reactionary as a consequence of that. So then they like create a false understanding inside of their diaspora community of what it means to be Turkish. And it's constantly at odds of what it means to be British in England or what it means to be German in Germany. I want to join Weasel News, actually. You should twat out your reporting. Working on a story. Sex work in Los Santos. Are the terms of service too restrictive? I've lost almost my life.
So who got hit by a tow truck?
I've lost my job prospects. Are you towing my van? What is to be done? But the news never stops. City is absolute garbage.